My name is Anne-Marie Brooks and I'm the head of the Early Learning and Care and School-Age Childcare Division at the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth. I'm very pleased to open this webinar that marks the launch of two major reports by the Minister for Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth today. I'm delighted to be joined on this webinar by Minister Roderick O'Gorman and my colleagues Hazel O'Byrne and Toby Wolfe. Many of you will be aware of First 5, the 10-year whole of government strategy for babies, young children and their families that was published in 2018. Today's reports deliver on two major commitments in First 5. Partnership for the Public Good, a new funding model for the early learning and care and school-aged childcare sector, proposes a new approach to state funding of the sector in the future. Nurturing Skills, a workforce plan for the sector, aims to strengthen the ongoing process of professionalisation for those working in the sector over the period 2022 to 2028. Over the next 40 minutes or so, we want to share an overview of these reports, which we believe will shape the development of the early learning and care and school-aged childcare sector over the coming years. At this stage, I'm very pleased to hand over to Minister Roderick O'Gorman to give an opening address. Thank you, Minister.
Delighted to be here today to launch two major reports that will shape the future of early learning and care and school-aged childcare sector. Partnership for the Public Good, a new funding model for early learning and care and school-aged childcare, and Nurturing Skills, the workforce plan for early learning and care and school-aged childcare. Each report represents the culmination of more than 2 years of work, and they set out the way forward for fundamental building blocks of the sector, the full funding model and the workforce. Partnership for the Public Good is the report of an independently chaired expert group to develop a new funding model. The expert group was made up of eminent and distinguished figures in early learning and care, economics and public policy. Expertise and wisdom is evident throughout the report and recommendations. I would particularly like to thank the chair of that group, Michael Scanlon, for his excellent leadership of this important project and for delivering such an impactful outcome. A highly rigorous approach was adopted by the expert group, drawing on detailed research, data and other inputs which have been published throughout the process. This rigor clearly underpins all of the group's analysis and conclusions and hugely strengthens the report. It gives me great confidence and assurance about the recommendations arrived at, and I'm pleased to report that these have now been accepted by government. Consultation and engagement with those involved in the sector, parents, workers, providers and others, was another key ingredient in the success of this report. An iterative approach was taken over 3 phases, which started with seeking perspectives from a wide range of contributors and progressively became more detailed and specific, with a key reference group of representative groups and other stakeholders. This careful balancing of different views and interests came across very clearly in the report. The overarching theme of the report is about partnership for the public good. It clearly and unequivocally recognises the public good dimension of early learning and care and school-aged childcare for children, for families and for society and the economy more widely. These are crucial services and the state has a strong interest in ensuring they are high quality, affordable, inclusive and sustainable. And this has to be achieved through a relationship of partnership with providers working together for the public good. This emphasis marks a new departure for the approach of the state in the sector, and which I think can open up huge potential for the future. While acknowledging the many positives in the sector, the report does not shy away from the challenges such as low pay, high costs, low investment, and the impact of market-driven approaches. Most helpfully, though, it provides a clear direction for how these issues could be addressed. Central to the group's recommendations is that a new supply-side approach to investment should be developed, core funding. Core funding is key to unlocking the most challenging aspects of the current system and offers a new basis on which to build partnership between the state and providers. The group recommends building on core funding with additional funding and supports, both targeted and universal, to tackle this advantage. Both of these new funding elements are designed to operate alongside the ECCE preschool programme and the National Childcare Scheme, the NCS, with developments to both to make up an integrated and reinforced model of funding to deliver a range of policy objectives. The full details of this new model are described in the report. I was really happy to have the opportunity to meet the chair of the expert group in advance of the estimates process to allow the emerging recommendations to shape my approach to budget 2022. And as announced on Budget Day, 2022 will see a transformative and groundbreaking package of measures introduced to begin to implement the vision set out in the group's report. €78 million is being made available to enable this, including €69 million for a core funding stream equivalent to €207 million in a full year. Core funding will support the establishment of an employment regulation order to improve pay and conditions in the sector, ensure sustainability and stability for services, improve quality of provision, and freeze parental fees so that the full affordability benefits of the HA programme and the NCS can be realised. This is the start of what I hope will be a multi-annual programme of investment to substantially increase public funding for early learning and care and school-age childcare, and to deliver partnership with the sector for the public good. The second report I'm launching today is Nurturing Skills, the Workforce Plan for Early Learning and Care and School-Age Childcare 22 to 28. It fits well with the report of the expert group on the funding model, as the workforce, the early years educators and school-age childcare practitioners, as well as childminders, are the very heart of the services with which the government works in partnership. While funding is critical, it is those working in the sector, supporting children's development, learning and well-being, working in partnership with families, who ensure that early learning and care and school-age childcare bring so many benefits. Those working in the sector do not yet receive the recognition they deserve. Unfortunately, many continue to leave the sector as they do not see a future for themselves within it. The COVID-19 pandemic has compounded the challenges and pressures in a sector which has consistently gone above and beyond in the work they do with children and families. I would particularly like to pay tribute to early years educators, school-age childcare practitioners and childminders at this time, when the COVID-19 pandemic is causing so much disruption, stress and worry. Those working in this sector have made an enormous contribution, and I would like to acknowledge that. They deserve public recognition for their commitment and their professionalism. Nurturing Skills, the Workforce Plan, aims to build on that professionalism and actively to support the workforce in continuing its professional journey. Much progress has already been made. A minimum qualification requirement to work in early learning and care was introduced in 2016, and the proportion of early years educators with a degree level qualification has risen from 12% in 2012 to 34% today, thus surpassing the 30% interim target that was set in First 5. But there is still a long journey ahead to achieve the ambition set out in First 5 of a graduate-led workforce by 2028. The action set out in Nurturing Skills provides a roadmap for the next steps in the workforce's journey towards professionalisation. Key actions include achieving a graduate-led workforce in early learning and care by 2028, with new financial supports to assist early years educators to study while continuing to work in the sector. Supporting school-age childcare practitioners to meet new qualification requirements that will be introduced incrementally over the coming years. Development of a career framework and strengthening career pathways, including new supports for leadership development, building a national infrastructure for continued professional development, and supporting staff recruitment, retention, and diversity in the workforce. Actions to develop further these elements will continue in terms of developing career pathways and support staff recruitment, and these will complement efforts that are already underway to improve pay and conditions of employment in the sector. In particular, a key enabler for Nurturing Skills will be the Joint Labour Committee for Early Years Services, which was recently established following a process I began last December. Likewise, the new core funding stream announced in Budget 2022 and set out in Partnership for the Public Good will support service providers to meet higher costs arising from pay increases without raising fees for parents. The commitments in Nurturing Skills align with the recommendations of the OECD's Country Policy Review of Early Childhood Education and Care in Ireland, which I launched last week and which was undertaken in parallel with the development of Nurturing Skills. In addition to the OECD team, I would like to acknowledge the contributions of all those who have inputted into the development of this plan over the past 2 years. I would like particularly to thank members of the steering group, stakeholder group, and various working groups. I would like to thank the officials, both in my department and in the Department of Education, who collaborated so effectively in the preparation of the plan. And I would also like to thank everybody who contributed to the public consultations that took place in 2020. The 2 reports I'm launching today present a far-reaching and ambitious response to some of the fundamental challenges in this sector. Together, they will result in significant reform of that relationship between the state and the services and workers who are so critical in delivering high-quality early learning and care and school-age childcare. Over the years ahead, they will strengthen the quality of provision, support affordability and access, and provide a new basis for ensuring that public investment in the sector works for the public good, working in partnership with service providers and their staff to support children. Thank you, and I now hand back to Anne-Marie and her team, who will talk through more of the detail of the report. And finally, just to say a huge thank you to Anne-Marie and her team for all the work that's been done to bring us this far.
We appreciate your time today and the leadership and commitment you've brought to this policy area. So now we're going to have 2 short presentations, one on each report. And I'd like to introduce you to the first speaker, Hazel O'Byrne, and Hazel is the head of the Policy and Strategy Unit at the department, and she'll take you through a brief overview of the report of the expert group, including a summary of their recommendations. So over to you, Hazel.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. I'm going to introduce the report of the expert group on the new funding model for early learning and care at school-age childcare, which is called Partnership for a Public Good. So first of all, to start off with a little bit of background about the group. So an expert group was established to agree guiding principles for a new funding model, to review the existing approach to funding against those guiding principles, to consider options for how additional funding to the sector could be structured, and to produce a final report proposing a design for the new funding model. And that's what I'm speaking about here today. Within that context, it was specified that their recommendations would operate within the current model of provision, and a number of other details of scope were also specified in the full terms of reference. So that expert group was independently chaired and was comprised of national and international members, and a number of very distinguished and eminent members contributed to the group. There was very extensive stakeholder engagement and consultation that took place over a year of operation of the group, and there was very wide-ranging international comparative research, data analysis, and other inputs sought by the group to inform their work. So to speak then to the guiding principles that the expert group developed, they identified 6 guiding principles, and these also formed part of the first phase of consultation. And just in very brief terms, the guiding principles were that the new funding model should be strategic and designed to fulfill the public good for children, for families, for the economy, and for wider society. It should be child-centred and developed in the best interests of children. It should be family-oriented and support parents in their choices about employment or training and help them to mitigate the costs. It should be based on a professional and valued workforce, acknowledging that the quality of services is based on the quality of staff. The new funding model should contribute to the development of a competent sector that's committed to ongoing quality improvement, and that the development and implementation of the new funding model should be informed by inputs from those that are involved and affected by the new funding model, as well as evidence and data. So in the report, the expert group start off by examining the existing system, and particularly with a particular focus on funding. They note the challenges of international comparisons in respect of funding, but acknowledge the need for greater investment in Ireland. And in this respect, the first 5 commitment to double investment on 2018 levels by 2028 is welcomed, but they also say that more is likely to be required to fulfil the vision of the group. The report acknowledges the very positive features of the current system, including the universal early childhood care and education programme and the targeted and universal elements of the National Childcare Scheme subsidies. However, there are a number of very important concerns that are identified in relation to high employee turnover, low pay and poor conditions, and particularly the extent to which they impact on quality and children's experience. There's a sense of precariousness that's felt by many providers. There's a high fee burden on some parents, and there's currently an absence of any specific supports to tackle disadvantage. So building out then from this analysis of the current system, the expert group outlines the case for change and a rationale for reform. So the report is very clear in the need for the new funding model to be very explicitly aligned with the public good delivered by the sector for children and for parents. They note that currently it's the case that provision is very much shaped by the market as well as the structure of public funding, and that there is a need for a greater level of state investment, but alongside that then a greater level of public management of the sector. So the group then identifies that supply side funding to providers is a key mechanism to channel additional investment and for the state then to play a greater role. That's a big and important point about supply side funding. So the next theme that the expert group looks at is quality, and the report is very clear and unequivocal that current levels of pay and the conditions of the workforce in the sector are the biggest issue undermining quality, particularly the extent to which these impact on recruitment and retention of staff. The report is clear that the state should, through its supply side funding, support an agreement on improved pay and conditions between employers and employees, and they note that the Joint Labour Committee is the most appropriate way to do this. They also point to the scope for the supply side funding to enable other features of service quality, such as non-contact time, continuing professional development and curriculum implementation. And a quote from the report is that the funding model should aim to develop and support a partnership between the state and providers, with both being jointly responsible for the delivery of quality services. In relation then to affordability and fee controls, the analysis of the expert group is that out-of-pocket costs to many families are high, and this is especially the case for families who have multiple children and who use a lot of hours of early learning and care, school-age childcare. They note that there's very significant variation in fees charged across the country and within individual local authority areas. And on that basis, and in line with the new supply side funding, they state that there's a very strong rationale for initiating fee management at this point. And they note that a more structured approach to managing the parental fees charged by providers is required. So that's very clear as well. The next theme is about addressing disadvantage, and the expert group notes that poverty and socioeconomic disadvantage significantly affect young children. And while disadvantage is widely dispersed across the country, its impact is compounded when that disadvantage is concentrated in a particular setting. They point to the access and inclusion model as offering helpful direction for universal supports to address disadvantage, and the DESH model in schools, for which there's scope to inform the targeted supports. So they say that we favour the development and implementation of strong universal supports to address the needs of children experiencing disadvantage, and an additional supply side budget stream to support enhanced service provision. Moving on then to the overarching theme of public management, partnership and the role of the state. The expert group are very clear that public funding should be really explicitly oriented to achieve policy objectives, and that requires proactive, supportive public management at both local and national level. They espouse the need for a partnership approach between the state and providers in order to achieve this. And they note that this requires an openness, transparency, and the development of mutual trust between the state and providers to operate in this partnership way. And they say that the state has a right and a duty to ensure that the market serves the public good through this partnership. So based on all of that analysis, and as required by the terms of reference, the expert group have developed this proposal for the new funding model. So it's based on 4 major elements of funding, 2 of which are new developments, and 2 of which are developments to the existing funding streams. And it's very much intended to work as a whole, as an integrated whole, with each element connected and reinforcing the others. So the 2 new elements of the funding model are core funding and tackling disadvantage funding. So core funding is a new supply side payment to support quality, including improved staff pay, sustainability and enhanced public management, with conditions on fee control and cost transparency, incorporating funding for administration and to support the employment of graduate staff. Tackling disadvantage is the second strand which is a new element in the funding model, and that's about new universal and targeted approaches to address socioeconomic disadvantage with accompanying funding streams. In terms of the National Childcare Scheme, the expert group recommend developments to provide enhanced universal support to all families, tailor additional supports to high volume users of services, and to resolve some of the issues that arise from the work study requirement feature of the National Childcare Scheme. And in relation to the ECHE programme, Early Childhood Care and Education programme, they recommend that this largely continues, but with funding to support the employment of graduates incorporated into core funding, and the AIM model extended beyond the ECHE programme. So in order then to step out this funding model implementation, the expert group makes 25 specific recommendations across 5 headings as follows. So the first one is about core funding. And as I said, this recommends the introduction of a supply side payment to support the quality of services and enable a cultural shift to that partnership way of working. Core funding should be based on the capacity being offered by services, and it will enable the Joint Labour Committee process on the implementation of the workforce plan. It should incorporate, as I said, funding for administration and supports for employing graduates, and it should unlock access to other supports and resources, for example, capital funding. The conditions that should attach to core funding include fee management, quality improvement measures, implementation of practice frameworks, transparent financial reporting and other data collection, and providers offering NCS and ECHE depending on their hours of operation. There should be guidance on how the funding can be used and the accountability arrangements, and it should be underpinned by a set of national indicators. The expert group note that there is potential for core funding to apply to childminding, although there may be a need for some modification, and that this should be examined as well. In relation to tackling disadvantage, the expert group recommend firstly that universal training and supports on socioeconomic disadvantage and an inclusive culture should be developed. They then say that there should be a mechanism to allocate targeted funding to services with concentrated socioeconomic disadvantage. And this targeted funding should be designed to support consistent, high quality interaction between services and children and families who use those services. Services in receipt of that funding should be required to publish a short tackling disadvantage plan, and that this funding should also be underpinned by a set of national indicators. They note that there may be a need for a possible further element of funding to allow for individual applications for exceptional needs, but this should be reviewed following the first 2 elements of the tackling disadvantage funding being implemented. The expert group recommend consideration of extension of AIM to all settings and different types of services. And they note that there should be a role for the operating model in outreach and engagement with families at risk of poverty and disadvantage. And they recommend that there should be an approach adopted to address the impact of the work study test on access for children at risk of poverty. And indeed, this has been announced already in the context of Budget 22. In relation to affordability measures, the expert group recommend removing the existing age limit on the universal NCS subsidy, and again that's been signalled in Budget 22, and they also recommend an increase in value of the universal subsidy. They recommend that a revised approach is taken to calculating NCS subsidies for families with more than one child to reduce the withdrawal rate of subsidy as family income increases. And in future, they recommend that consideration should be given to developing the National Childcare Scheme so that subsidies and household expenditure for early learning care and school-age childcare are more closely linked to household income, and that could, for example, be expressed as an explicit withdrawal rate for families on the income excess subsidy, or a cap on the percentage income paid by parents, and that should be examined in line with data that's collected on costs. In relation to fee management, the expert group recommends the development of a searchable price comparability website, and if necessary to require providers to express fees in a way that is readily comparable, so for example hourly rates by age of child. That data is collected on provider costs on a periodic basis, and that a new fee management system should be attached to core funding. They say that initially this should mean that there's no increase in parental fees on the September 2021 levels for the September 22 to August 23 programme year. And in due course, there should be scope to use the provider cost data to explore the management of actual fee rates, including whether it's reasonable to introduce a common national provider fee structure in the medium term. Its final set of recommendations relate to the role of the state, and that's about putting in place the necessary expertise and resources for enhanced public management, to include things like capacity planning, providing better information to parents on fees, on vacancies, on inspections, on quality and other things, on supporting the development of an optimal sector, on supporting providers to operate sustainable, high quality, affordable services, and on managing centre closures where they arise. They recommend the continuation of sustainability funding, but that this should be reviewed to take account of the new funding model. And in the medium term, they recommend the examination of whether some element of public provision should be introduced alongside private provision. So that's the summary of the recommendations of the expert group. A note just on their vision for the sector, I think it's worth reiterating here. The expert group say that our vision for the sector is one that is increasingly publicly funded and publicly managed, delivering a service for the public good through a partnership between the state and providers to the benefit of children, parents, practitioners and society overall. So I wanted just to finish briefly with a thank you to people who've been involved in this project over the last 2 years. First and foremost, obviously the expert group, the chair and the full membership who've given very significant time and expertise. The secretariat within the department who have undertaken stellar work to support the expert group and produce the report. Would like to thank the many parents, members of the workforce, providers and others who contributed to the stakeholder engagement process at various stages. A number of organisations who supported phase 1, the very wide-ranging phase 1 consultation. I'd like to thank the research partner Frontier Economics, who provided a lot of input to the expert group, along with the ESRI, Pubble, Crow and others who provided analysis. And officials within government departments in various departments in Ireland, as well as officials from Norway and from New Brunswick in Canada who presented on their work. So thank you to all of them for their significant contribution to the work of the group, and thank you for listening, and I hope you get a chance to read the full report as well. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll now hand back to Anne-Marie.
Colleague Toby Wolfe, who's the head of the quality unit in the department, to provide a short overview of the workforce plan. So Toby.
Nurturing Skills is the title of the workforce plan for early learning and care and school-age childcare. Nurturing Skills sets out actions the government will take to advance professional development and to raise the profile of careers in the sector over the years ahead. Nurturing Skills aims to deliver on those commitments that were set out in First 5 that relate to the workforce, including achieving a graduate-led workforce in early learning and care by 2028, raising the profile of careers in the sector, establishing a career framework and leadership development opportunities, and a national program of continuing professional development, as well as working towards more gender-balanced and diverse workforce. In addition, there are commitments to a minimum qualification for school-age childcare and a minimum qualification for childminding. The preparation of Nurturing Skills was overseen by an interagency steering group, which included 2 external experts. A stakeholder group accompanied the steering group throughout the process, and there was very strong stakeholder involvement at all stages in development of the plan. During phase 2 of development of the plan earlier this year, 5 working groups developed detailed proposals. Membership of the working groups included members of the steering group, stakeholder group, as well as subject specialists who were invited to join the groups. A public consultation on the plan took place in 2020. It included an online survey, as well as a series of focus groups with early years educators, school-age childcare practitioners, service providers, and other stakeholders. Preparation of Nurturing Skills was also supported by Ireland's participation in 2 international projects that took place in parallel to development of the plan. Firstly, a project led by the European Commission, which resulted in a report published last year entitled How to Recruit, Train and Motivate Well-Qualified Staff. And secondly, the OECD's Quality Beyond Regulations project, which resulted in the Starting Strong 6 report earlier this year, and a country policy review of early childhood education and care in Ireland, published this December. The vision set out in the report is of a well-qualified, skilled, diverse and valued professional workforce that is centered on children's rights, needs and potential, and that provides quality experiences for children in partnership with families, and which continues to advance its professional development within a coherent and competent system. The language used to describe different roles in the sector was informed by the 2020 consultation process and by the stakeholder working groups. The titles used in the report are working titles, pending the formation of a professional body. The title used for an individual working with children in an early learning and care setting is Early Years Educator. The title for a room leader in an early learning and care setting is Lead Educator. And the title used for an individual working with children in a school-age childcare service is School-age Childcare Practitioner. This slide shows the structure of the plan. The actions in Nurturing Skills are organized under 5 pillars. Pillar 1 is establishing a career framework. Pillar 2 focuses on raising qualification levels for early years educators, school-age childcare practitioners, and childminders. Pillar 3 involves developing a national continuing professional development system. Pillar 4 focuses on supporting recruitment, retention, and diversity in the workforce. And Pillar 5 involves moving towards regulation of the profession. Nurturing Skills identifies 3 enablers that will be key to the successful implementation of the actions under the 5 pillars. The first enabler is improvement in pay and conditions of employment. The second enabler is coordination of the quality support infrastructure. And the third enabler is ongoing engagement with the profession. Implementation of Nurturing Skills will be overseen by a monitoring committee and will take place in 2 stages with a midpoint review by 2025. In this short presentation, I'll highlight some of the central actions under each of the 5 pillars. You'll be able to see more detail on each slide, but I won't read out everything. And of course, for the full details, I'd encourage you to read the report itself. Pillar 1 focuses on establishing a career framework. Nurturing Skills defines core roles within settings and sets out targets and in some cases requirements for qualifications for those roles. While the minimum qualification requirement will remain at level 5, The lead educator role will over time become a graduate role for those leading practice with groups of children of all ages in early learning and care, not just children in the ECCE program. So nurturing skills includes a target that by 2028, 50% of early years educators will have relevant degrees, including all lead educators in early learning and care settings. Currently, 34% of early years educators have relevant degrees, which is higher than the 30% interim target that was set in First 5. Nurturing skills also sets a target that by 2028, 85% of early years educators should have a level 6 qualification, up from 72% today. Under nurturing skills, training will be introduced for those in management roles and to support those with leadership responsibilities within settings. By 2028, qualification requirements will be introduced for managers at level 6 in early learning and care and level 5 in school-aged childcare. Nurturing skills also commits to the incremental introduction by 2028 of a minimum qualification requirement at level 5 for school-aged childcare practitioners. This slide depicts career pathways that will be in place over the years ahead for early years educators and school-aged childcare practitioners. Different roles are coloured in blue, including educator and practitioner roles, lead educator roles, and managerial roles. And funded support programs are coloured in yellow. The workforce plan commits to introducing an induction program over the coming years for new entrants into the workforce. New supports will be introduced for participation in upskilling programs to enable early years educators to become lead educators. And continuing professional development supports will aim to support educators and practitioners to advance their practice, and also for some to take on leadership responsibilities within settings, both managerial roles and distributed leadership responsibilities, which may include, for example, pedagogical leadership responsibilities or the role of diversity and inclusion coordinator. Pillar 2 focuses on supports for raising qualification levels in early learning and care, school-aged childcare and childminding. Nurturing Skills commits to introducing new financial supports for early years educators and school-aged childcare practitioners to undertake courses leading to higher qualifications while continuing to work in the sector, whether on part-time, blended or flexible courses. These financial supports will be provided throughout a course to minimize the barriers to participation. Nurturing Skills will introduce new financial supports for services to support service providers to release staff who are studying while working to undertake practice placements and to take study leave. In addition, new training programs will be introduced for school-aged childcare practitioners, including an online program to support the new National Quality Guidelines for school-aged childcare, and for childminders, in line with the National Action Plan for Childminding. Pillar 3 focuses on development of a National Continuing Professional Development, or CPD, system. It commits to a whole system approach, including development of a single national gateway to quality-assured continuing professional development resources. And also development of an online system for services and individuals to record their participation in CPD activities. This will involve a broad understanding of CPD, encompassing not just formal training, but also non-formal and informal professional development activities, including centre-based learning, team-based learning, and professional learning communities, which we know can be so effective in supporting professional development. Participation in continuing professional development will be supported by the new core funding stream for services that was announced in Budget 2022, and which will include financial support for non-contact time. Nurturing Skills also commits to making CPD resources available both in Irish and in English. Pillar 4 focuses on supporting recruitment, retention, and diversity in the workforce. Nurturing Skills commits to adopting a one-stop shop approach to information on careers in the sector and training opportunities, and commits to actively promoting careers in the sector over the years ahead. Actions will also support diversity in the workforce, including further rollout of equality, diversity, and inclusion training. And data on diversity in the workforce will be gathered to help set new diversity targets. And the development of a range of entry routes into the sector will be examined, including work-based learning opportunities, as well as access routes into further and higher education programs. Pillar 5 supports movement towards regulation of the profession. Nurturing skills includes a commitment to continue movement towards regulation of the profession, but sets no date for regulation to come into force. It also commits to consider development of a professional standards body to oversee qualifications, bringing together the work of the Qualifications Advisory Board and the qualifications recognition process. The oversight of qualification standards will also extend to encompass oversight of new qualifications in school-age childcare. And a regulatory requirement for English language proficiency in English medium services will be introduced over an appropriate timescale. A few moments ago, I mentioned the 3 key enablers set out in the plan, which will be key to successful implementation of the actions across the 5 pillars. The first key enabler is pay and conditions. A joint Labour Committee for Early Years Services was recently established, which creates the opportunity for unions and employers to work together to negotiate an employment regulation order for the sector. The new core funding stream, announced in Budget 2022, will, among a number of objectives, support services to meet the costs of an employment regulation order. The second key enabler is the support infrastructure. Over the coming years, this will be strengthened, in particular with the development of a national infrastructure for continuing professional development, building on the outcome of the review of the operating model that is currently underway. The third key enabler is engagement with the profession. The stakeholder engagement plan will be developed, the workforce will be represented on the monitoring committee, and the plan commits to engagement and consultation with a professional association, if and when established. Turning to implementation, nurturing skills includes an implementation plan for the first 3 years, 2022 to 2024. A monitoring committee will shortly be established to oversee implementation, and the monitoring committee will include representation of the workforce. An indicator set will be developed for monitoring the progress of implementation. And to support monitoring, Ireland will, for the first time, take part in the OECD TALIS Starting Strong survey, which involves a periodic survey of a representative sample of early years educators. The next round of the TALIS Starting Strong survey will take place in 2024, and the findings will inform the midpoint review of nurturing skills, which will take place in 2025. Following the midpoint review, a second implementation plan will be developed for the years 2025 to 2028. Last but not least, may I thank all the many people who were involved in the preparation of nurturing skills. In particular, may I thank the members of the steering group and the members of the stakeholder group, the many stakeholders and officials who took part in the 5 working groups, including the rapporteurs, which developed detailed proposals for the plan, the participants in the public consultation, both the respondents to the online survey and the participants in the focus groups, the OECD team, which carried out the country policy review, which helped inform the plan, and the Secretariat, who coordinated the process. And thank you for listening.
All the contributors to this short webinar. I'd also like to echo my thanks to all that were involved in bringing these reports to conclusion, including the funding model expert group, the workforce plan steering group, stakeholder group, and working groups. Thanks to those who also contributed to the extensive evidence base that underpin these reports, including Frontier Economics, Hubble, the ESRI, and the OECD. And many thanks to those of you, providers, early years educators, school-age childcare practitioners, parents, and representative bodies who contributed to this process. So today's webinar has been about sharing information with you about the high-level content of these reports. Both reports are now available online in addition to other documentation that inform these reports. We will be following up on today's webinar with further engagement with the sector, including a meeting of the Early Learning and Care Stakeholder Forum next week. We also plan further and ongoing engagement and communication in relation to both reports to commence in early 22. And we very much look forward to working in partnership with all stakeholders as we move into implementation. Thank you for your time today.